Fletcher, Chief Growth Officer at Cypress North. We're a digital agency in Buffalo, New York, and you're listening to the Agency Scoop. Each episode, I'll tackle a specific topic from an agency point of view. We're going to talk about what's helping us grow, challenges that we face, how we're working with our clients, and even things that bring us joy. Thank you for tuning in to this month's episode of the Agency Scoop. We have a really great interview for you today. And if you like what you hear, please make sure to subscribe to the Agency Scoop and also rate and review us so others can find the podcast. So before we get into today's interview with Amalia Fowler, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with us at Cypress North. So I have been calling this new business season and been getting teased a little bit because it sounds a little like hunting season or bathing suit season, but it's not as exciting as that, but maybe for agency people it will be. So every year in the fall, it kind of creeps up on us, but as soon as the summer ends and people go back to work after Labor Day, their vacations are over, their kids are back in school, whatever it may be, all of a sudden it is new business season. And there are so many requests. I get 3 to 10 emails a day of someone asking, hey, can we talk about my digital marketing? Hey, we're starting to talk about a new website. Can we talk to you and see what your capabilities are? So they're just popping up out of nowhere. And some of them are people we've never talked to before. Some of them are referrals from current clients, which we love. Thank you to our wonderful current clients. And some are, people that I maybe have a relationship with or that the agency had a relationship with before and have kind of come back out of nowhere. So there's a few reasons that this happens. And I think, at every agency you have this during this time of year, September, October. And the main one is that they're planning for 2022. It's budgeting season. If you're on the regular calendar year budgets, a lot of times people are talking about their budgets for January and they're like, oh, okay, I got to do some research. I have to figure out who I'm going to use, how much this will cost. I want to do new things next year, so I got to get those in the plan. Some people are coming because they need to spend the rest of their budget for this year and they need to do it quickly so it doesn't get taken away from their budget next year. So they might be realizing, oh my gosh, I only have a few months left and I need to, use the rest of my budget. And other times, a lot of people who we talk to, maybe they don't like who they're currently working with, or there's some issues with their current agency. So they're using this budget season as the best time to make a change and figure out who else is out there. So while we're in the midst of new business season and I'm furiously writing proposals all day, every day, and talking to these new potential clients and evaluating them, it's also a really great reminder for us at the agency that it is that time of the year that our current clients are thinking through the same things. And so it's a great time to help your clients plan for next year. It's a great time to ask them what they're planning to do, if they're doing anything differently, if they're planning to hire anybody for their department, if they're planning on taking any of the work that you currently do in-house, or if they're planning to outsource more of the work that they currently do in-house. So it's a really great time to have those conversations with your clients. Ask them if you can do anything to help them prepare for this budgeting season if they are indeed in the middle of it, like many others. And if they aren't asking you, don't take that as that they're not doing it, because maybe they're doing it on their own. Maybe they're just doing the status quo, but it's a really great time to ask current clients for that feedback. So I think it's helpful to offer reporting, maybe offer recommendations when you're asking about their budgets for next year, saying, is this the right time to get something in the budget to do additional testing or go on some different platforms, or, this website you've been talking about redoing for 3 years, is that coming up this year? What can we do there? So it's a really great time to work with your current clients to grow those relationships, as well as, focus on that new business that's coming in. Sometimes new business seems shiny and new and exciting. And so you'll be focusing on that during this time of the year, but it's a good reminder to think about your current clients. So that was my 2 cents for today. And, I'd love to hear what you all are doing. If you're on the agency side, tell me how you set up planning meetings with your clients or how you use this time of the year the best. And if you're on the client side or you're in-house, I'd love to hear how you engage your agencies for that kind of planning. With that being said, now we are on to the interview for today's episode. I'm so excited to introduce you all to Amalia Fowler. If you don't already know her, she is someone that's been in the ad agency game for a little bit. She is the creator of the Wholehearted Manager, which is a newsletter and community for managers who believe in leading with empathy and treating their employees as humans first. So the perpetual middle manager, Amalia, spent her whole career leading teams of various sizes with a 98% retention rate of those she's hired. And as we talk about during the interview, the 2% that she didn't retain actually resigned the day before, 2 days before she resigned. So we could call it 100%, Amalia. We'll let you get away with it. But when she isn't working or instructing in the classroom, you can find her paddling or drinking coffee in the Pacific Northwest. One of our first international guests calling in from Canada to have this conversation with me. Here is my interview with Amalia Fowler, the Wholehearted Manager. Well, thank you for joining me, Amalia. We have Amalia Fowler here today to talk about her experience. I know that you've had a really exciting career in a couple different places and a lot of different management experience. And so I wanted to have you on the show today to talk about, your management philosophies and, all of that. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. First of all, I'm very excited to be here. In terms of my career, there's kind of two different versions. There's like the agency path, and then there's the manager path. The agency path started, I went back to school when I was 27 for a marketing diploma. And 2 years later, went to my internship. And my very first day as an intern, the person training me quit her job. And they were like, do you want it? Do you just it was a startup. And they were like, well, you're here. Do you want her job? And I was like, yes, I want her job. And so then I was in that role, basically teaching. I had one manager who kind of knew a little bit about what I was doing, but not really taught myself, grew in that role, ended up managing a team and managing that entire department within 3-year span. So that was I call my agency experience now when I talk to students, basically I was on a rocket ship because I went intern, junior, senior, team lead in 3 years. That ended and I went to my next agency where I was a senior, and I was so excited to just start and only be responsible for myself for a hot minute. And 3 months later, a whole bunch of things happened, and most of the leadership that was in existence ended up leaving. And so again, it was, there's nobody else. Do you want this director job? Do you want to do this job? And I was like, sure. And so then I ended up being a director of marketing 3 years into my career, which is usually, they're 5+ years. And then I did that for 3.5, another 3 years after that. I was the director of marketing there. So wow. Within a 5-year period, I think I held 8 different positions, most of which were management positions. So that's my agency career. It's 2 agencies, 8 jobs.
Wow.
Which is fun and terrifying and right place, right time, plus hard work and all of that. My management life, I realized a while ago, started when I was 18. I started working when I was 15. And then by the time I was 18, I was in my first leadership role. And I managed stores, I managed people, I managed Starbucks, I managed, there was a lot of management roles that I didn't, until I wrote this newsletter and until I started to care about management, I didn't really think about that part. But the best part is I found a review from my job when I was 17. And the next year I was a supervisor at that job. And the review was Amalia needs to learn to stay in her own lane when she's not a manager. It was a glowing review. And then the last part was she has great leadership skills, but when she's not a leader, she needs to just dial it back a little bit. And
That's
from
how
then
you
on,
become a manager. Then they see that you can manage,
right? The
right?
next year I was managing. My husband jokes because I start a job and I'm like, I'm just not going to lead anyone. I'm just going to lead me. We're just going to, in 6 months, I have a team. And he's like, you can't help it. You can't help it. And they can't help moving you into those roles. He's like, so just stop trying to separate yourself from it. But that's a little bit about kind of my career. So I like to say I've been in agency. Well, I am not currently. I guess I am. I'm consulting for agencies right now. So I'm still in agency world for about 6 years, and then management for an undisclosed number, because I told you I started when I was 18 and I don't want anyone doing that math, but a long time.
I'll respect it.
Thank
we won't
you.
talk about the math. Well, and so how did you start about with your philosophy that started the Wholehearted Manager? So your newsletter, the Wholehearted Manager, you have a Twitter, the Wholehearted Manager. It's amazing content for anybody that's starting out in management, or anybody that's been in management for a while and is like, what am I doing wrong? But it's really great content. So like, what made you start writing this content? What made you realize that like these were the lessons that people need to learn?
Yeah, that is a great question. I don't want to disparage any of my managers because they were all wonderful in their own way. But there were also things about every job I've had, except my current one, actually. And I'm not just saying that because it's my current job. Having functional leadership has been a real trip, honestly, the last couple months, like completely functional, because all of my managers have had great things about them, but some aspect of it within the organization, something they did, something they said, their general philosophies never sat completely right with me. And when I thought about it more, which was after I left my first agency, really, when I thought about it more, I realized a lot of it was because they didn't look at at some point when the company got too big, or when the team got too big, or when something happened, they didn't look at their team as people anymore. They started to look at them as, employees or numbers, or they would revert back to what I say goes, or you're so young, you can't possibly understand, or you're not grateful for all the things that I've done for you, which is by the way, it's a terrible line to like have out in the world as a manager. And so I'm a wholly empathetic person, and that took a long time for me to embrace. I'm a very emotional person, and therefore also lead with my heart. I can't help it. And I spent a lot of time trying to fight that, especially with my first manager. When I was in my first agency manager role, they were like, you're too feelings. Like you have too many feelings when you're managing your team. And I tried to be different. Like I really tried to manage the way they were managing, and it just did not, I didn't feel like myself. It didn't fit with me. I ended up burning out. And so ultimately the Wholehearted Manager, you don't have to be empathetic. You don't have to be an emotional person. I mean, you have to have empathy, but that doesn't have to be your default setting. It's about managing the way that you as a human are meant to manage very authentically. And then also in a way that just treats your team and your employees with this base level of respect for the fact that they are also people. Like, yes, you have power, and yes, you have things that are important for you to put your foot down about, and you can't say yes to everything, but it's how you say no, and it's how you interact with them. And it's recognizing they have lives outside of work, and recognizing that like everyone's got their own stuff to deal with. I don't know if I can swear. I was going to say shit, but everyone has their own shit to deal with.
Yeah. I don't know if you can either.
So I will refrain. It will be a lot of work, but I will refrain.
That's cool.
So yeah, that was what led to the philosophy. And then in terms of starting the newsletter, I left my first job, and I was like floored when I left that so many of the employees there, we grew from 8 to 80 people in 3 years. So it was a massive, massive shift. I was the only female manager in the entire company at the time. And so when I left, there was a lot of, I didn't leave on the best of terms with my boss, but there were a lot of messages from especially young women within the organization about the impact that watching me do my job had on them. And that was not something that I had ever considered and meant a lot to me at the time. And 2 years into this current agency, when I was starting to, or the one that I just left, when I was starting to think about moving on, I was having similar conversations about just the impact I had had on my team. And one of my really good friends who lives in Ontario and just started managing her own team, we were having conversations about it. And she was like, you should write about this because this advice is so valuable to me and has changed the way I manage. And like, maybe more people would be interested. And so I just decided to start.
Yeah.
And so that's how that happened.
That's awesome. It's funny because as such a driven, career-minded woman, I mean, I relate to that and having your goals and all of that, but sometimes you can't see what the possibilities are for yourself, you know, and you need that good friend or that good person that's also a professional woman to be like, hey, you should do this because this would be perfect for you. And you're like, oh, yeah, I should. Like, I'm just thinking about applying it for myself, but I think that's awesome that you're sharing it with the world.
The timing was also purposeful because I knew at the time when I started the Wholehearted Manager that I was also going to be leading my agency, as a lot of the stories I have are about my experience. And I knew that my employees were going to sign up. And so the first few had to strike that balance between I'm still my boss or I'm still their boss and I know they're reading it. And so that was a thing. And then I moved to this job. And so I feel a little bit more free in telling some of those stories just because, not that I would ever throw anybody under the bus, but I don't want, one of the tricks of being a manager, especially a middle manager to me, is like striking that balance of neutrality, even when you are frustrated with either the people under you or the people over you, like who are your boss. And so I felt like I was compromising that a little bit in that time by telling some of the stories that I had to tell. Of course, now when I went to my new job, my boss was like, "Oh, I subscribe to your manager, so I'm in the same, or your newsletter, so I'm in the same boat now." But it's fine because I don't really work in the same kind of capacity with this job.
Yeah. You don't want to go
was
to
fun.
the office and someone's like, was that person you were referring to me?
Yeah, right. And it's never specific, and but it's not hard, especially since I came from an agency of 13 as opposed to like 80 people. If I'm talking about something, chances are someone can like deduce. So I was very careful with that, which was part of the timing of it as well, because I think I started thinking about it in like January and I waited 4 or 5 months before writing and actually sending it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, I figured, you know, based on these newsletters, I've been following you since the beginning when you announced on Twitter that you had it, and I signed up at the link. I pulled out a few topics that you've been writing about, and I thought maybe we could just chat through some of them and, you know, hear straight from you, you know, some of your insights about this stuff. So one of the things, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but one of the things like you were saying, towing that line of like the company and not saying too much when you put it out there. And one of the things that you wrote about was when your friend is your employee or you become good friends with an employee. And that's a really hard thing, I think, for managers, especially as you're promoted within. A lot of people think to be promoted, you have to manage people. And so then people want to go out for those jobs, but maybe they're not necessarily made for management, or they are, but they go for those. And then they end up managing people that they used to work alongside of. And that's just a really hard thing. So maybe can you talk about that a little bit? I know you did an interview with a friend of yours that you knew you would be friends with when you hired her. But there's also situations where you were already friends with someone and now all of a sudden you're their manager and you have to give them harsh feedback or critical feedback that it's hard when you're friends with someone. So I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that and crossing those lines.
It's so hard. And absolutely. First of all, I think that companies do their employees a disservice by not having subject matter expert tracks alongside management tracks as like a way to move up. I'll just say that, like, blanket. So many times we take a subject matter expert and we give them a team because they know their subject so well, but we give them zero instructions on how to actually manage people. And
100%.
It ends up being a big part of the problem. That's a whole sidebar. I could do an entire podcast on just that. When it comes to friends, so Katie is who you're referring to. She's a gem. I love her so much. And when she was hired, I knew right away, like, we're going to be friends and keeping that distance. But I also have worked with people who were my friends. And then I ended up managing them. And some of those friendships don't exist anymore. Like, I'll just be completely honest. There is a risk level with that. And it takes a lot of effort from both people to define what the boundaries are and then stay within them. And so my biggest piece of advice, if you find out you're going to be managing a friend, take that, like, have a conversation out of the office as step one. So like, I have literally taken people to dinner. Like, if it was you and I was suddenly going to be managing you, we would go to dinner and I would be like, Jill, this is the situation. You are one of my favorite people on the planet. I have had the best time working with you. I'm now going to be in this new position. And I think things have to shift to protect us long-term so that I can do my job as a manager and that you can feel the way you should as my employee going forward. And like, what does that look like to you? How do I feel about it? And just have a conversation where you together establish, okay, these are our ground rules. These are our boundaries. For the first 3 months, we're not going to hang out outside of work, or we're not going to gossip about Brad and accounting anymore, or we're not going to, like, we will still have our weekly coffee, but we just won't talk about anything work related. Like, it has to be a joint effort between the two people. And then it has to be a little bit of like self-policing going forward. But I would say that the onus for that does fall on the person who's becoming the manager more than it does the person who's staying the employee. If it's a bitter Betty, it's a lot harder to deal with, like somebody who wanted the same role and now doesn't have it. But the same thing applies where you try to get them involved in the conversation. If they're truly your friend, they will be excited for you and want to support you in a lot of ways. And so that's how it starts. Now, there's a bunch of problems that can happen later, but that's how I would start, is having that conversation and then buying them the dinner because you are the one who got the promotion. So, you know.
Well, I don't know. With that, it's tough when, like you said, the bitter Betty, where they might have thought that they would get that, or, someone that you're friends with. I started my first job out of college was at an agency. And so as I grew, like the people that I was working with were, those become your friends from work. And so sometimes it's hard to separate that outside too, because all you did talk about was Brad and accounting, or, what was going on day to day.
Terrible.
Yeah. Well, Brad, he's always getting into trouble. But
he's my go-to. Poor Brad. I'm sorry if there's a Brad in accounting somewhere out there. I'm sure you're lovely.
I'm sure you're doing a great job and no one talks about you behind your back. But yeah, that's it. I mean, it's just a tough thing. And it's tough when you have to give I think one of the biggest things in management, and you've talked about this in your content as well, is giving and receiving feedback. And that's one of the hardest things to learn, because like you said, you get put in these management roles and you're not necessarily learning how to manage when you get put in them, and you kind of learn on the go a lot of the time. And giving and getting feedback is just the hardest thing to learn how to do it properly and how to do it so nobody's feelings are hurt or that they take it personally. And that's even harder, when it's a friend that you do have a personal relationship with. But I think feedback is one of the most important things, especially for that person that maybe didn't get that role. Right. Understanding like, what could I have done better, or what could I have, what can I change? How can I work towards that? And like giving that feedback and having something specific and constructive, and all of that is difficult. So how do you handle that with with your employees, like both giving and getting and getting it from them?
I have some blanket feedback rules. It's a little different if you haven't started this way. So I start that way. The very first time I have a one-on-one, which I know we'll probably talk about it as well, with someone, it's the very first conversation. Nothing has happened yet. I talk about how we give and receive feedback in the team. Like, it's away from the feedback. And regardless of it's me giving them feedback or them giving me feedback, I have some specific ground rules, which is it's always one-on-one. It's never where there's no like group feedback here. You don't shame people in front of other people. Not that you shame them at all, but it can feel very shamey sometimes. So it's one-on-one. It's in as close to the moment as possible. So we don't I don't love when people like hang on to all this feedback and then someone has their yearly review and it's like, well, here's the 18 things that I hated about your work this past year. Like, how are they supposed to fix it if they don't know that it happens and they think everything's fine? And then you get to their yearly review and all of a sudden you're not giving them money or a new position or whatever they want because of things they didn't know about because they're not mind readers like that. So that's a frustrating part. So individual, as close to the moment as possible, and then concrete examples. That is a non-negotiable. If they're going to be telling me something or I'm going to be telling them something, and again, it's the same. It doesn't matter who is giving feedback to who. The ground rules are that there has to be an example tied to it. So you have to be able to point to a specific behavior that is not personal. It is something that happened or was done or maybe was said, but it isn't, well, I just don't like your attitude. It's like, no, this specific comment in this meeting was problematic because of XYZ, not you are clearly you're clearly upset or you're clearly just trying to get attention in the meetings or whatnot. Like, it has to be specific examples. And so setting those ground rules before there's a problem has always served me well. I also am a firm believer of not putting meetings on the schedule with like nothing in them. Like, as a manager, when you schedule a meeting with your team member, they have an internal panic. Not like you could be the nicest person in the world. You could have the best relationship with them. It doesn't matter. As soon as you put a slot in their calendar with you alone, they're like, what did I do? Or am I getting fired? Or am I like, and it doesn't matter who they are, how great of an employee they are, like every single time. And so anytime I schedule any meetings, I let them know what it's about. Or if I know that it's like a constructive feedback moment, I just don't schedule it and I just call them in the afternoon, like out of the blue. I don't want people like not sleeping because of a conversation with me. It doesn't personally just doesn't sit well with me.
That's really good advice, because I think that a lot of times you don't think about it.
No.
And I know here everyone can see each other's calendars. So if we're like talking to someone one-on-one about something, and maybe if it's even like a specific client issue or something, but you don't necessarily want everybody to see it. Like, I'll usually like Slack somebody like, hey, I want to meet about this. I'm going to put it on your calendar. And then the calendar invite just says like chat or something, but like, at least they know what it's about. And I think that's good advice too, because you often forget about that. Like, you're like, I'm just going to schedule this for tomorrow, and then I'll make sure to talk to them about it tomorrow. But you're not thinking that they might be panicking.
A lot of the time I run into the feedback thing with new managers is I don't want to be mean. I feel mean. I feel aggressive. I feel like this is like, those conversations are so uncomfortable. And I get that, but you have to reframe it as the giving feedback is actually a kindness. Being honest to somebody, like with respect. You can deliver feedback with respect, and you should, which is my fourth rule, by the way. There has to be a level of respect in the conversation. But it's a kind thing. What is not kind is not telling somebody, because then we get into that situation where they can't fix it. They can't do better, and they don't know what's happening. So I have had my fair share of conversations And personally, as a manager, and I think this part will depend on what job you do, because there are some jobs where like you can't have this philosophy, and I totally understand that. But in marketing and an agency, you can, for the most part, have a philosophy of, okay, the first time someone makes a mistake, I approach that feedback conversation with curiosity, because I want to know if I didn't explain it properly. I start with the idea that I am the problem. And it often sets the tone for future feedback conversations, because they know I don't come out of the gate guns blazing about something. So obviously, yeah, exactly. So obviously, if this is like harassment or a violent issue, like that's completely different. But I'm talking about just like your normal like work mistakes. I would start the conversation and I'd be like, hey, so this client's budget was supposed to be $1,600. You accidentally have made it 2,000, 2,500, whatever it is. Can you let me know how this happened? Like, can you explain to me how we got here? Did I maybe not explain clearly enough? Do you know where to find the budgets? Did I rush this conversation? And I ask questions like I am the problem. I know I'm not the problem 90% of the time. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I am the problem. Sometimes I go into that conversation knowing that the instructions were super clear.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go into the conversation not being sure. And sometimes it's been a case of my employee learns differently than the other ones that came before them. And so they actually did need a separate set of instructions, because they're a visual learner versus an auditory or a kinesthetic learner. So then we walk through it again in a different way. But what that does too, as a manager, is it sets you up for later. So you have that conversation, you have the curiosity part of it, you problem solve together, and you send them an email. You send them an email that says, thanks for your time today. Just to review, here are the instructions in case like you need them again. And it lays the groundwork for any future feedback about that issue, because the second time you go back, I do not have a curiosity tone. I have we talked about this on this day and it's still happening. Can you explain to me why? They have there's just like literally no explanation, because we just had the conversation where I explained like how to do it again. And so that second time round, I also don't accept excuses. So I will call them out. So if it's like, oh, I don't know, I was like, well, that's not it really, like, why don't you think about it and we'll talk again tomorrow and you can tell me why it happened. Because it's just like, I don't know is not an answer. Yeah. I'm big on accountability and ownership as well, but you have to demonstrate that on the other side too. You can't expect things of your team that you are not going to do, which is why our feedback loop is the same. And for managers, employees are never going to they're never going to tell you what they think like 100%, because there's always this fear of losing their job. There's always this fear of being your least favorite. There's always this fear of jeopardizing a promotion or not getting the vacation time. And it's honestly a very valid fear in a lot of situations, because managers retaliate all over the place. Workplace trauma is a huge thing. So one of my employees didn't ask for time off for their first year because their previous manager used to make them justify why they deserved their PTO. Ugh. And it took me a long time to figure out. I would be like, why aren't you taking your time off? You please take your vacation. Like, please, it's part of avoiding burnout. Like, please go. And they were like, oh no, it's okay. And I was like, at one point I was just straight up like, okay, so you need to go. So tell me why you haven't. Like, I think I said, like, I'm not going to be mad about you taking your vacation. Is that what you think? And then she was like, yes, that is what I think. But it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with her past managers. And so as a manager, the very first, if you're not able to accept feedback without getting upset, which is such a tall order, then that's going to mess with your team the entire time. Yeah. So I mentioned I'm a very emotional person. It took me a long time, and it's still, I think, probably my biggest area of opportunity to just like have a neutral face when someone is telling me how they feel about something. And just be like, my default setting is tell me more, because if I just keep saying tell me more and they keep talking, it gives me enough time to like round out my internal reaction so that I can approach it with curiosity, and I can approach the conversation with like, okay, even if this is not something I agree with, it's clearly how they feel. And that is important enough to warrant a conversation.
Yeah.
Even if I'm not going to change.
Yeah. I always say like your perception is reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you're thinking this, whether I feel that it's real or not, it is your reality. So we have to figure out how to come together, you know, for that.
And in my very first agency job, it'll be funny if he listens to this podcast, actually. Hey, there were definitely like that boss was terrible at receiving feedback. Well, actually both of them were. There were two of them co-founders. And one was functional in every other way. The second one we're just not going to talk about. One was functional in every other way, but anytime anyone had feedback, it was like they couldn't look beyond their own sphere of reference. And so I think as a manager, it's really important to understand that your team doesn't have the information that you do, right? Just like if your boss is doing something like my last boss was very, very nice, very cared a lot about his employees, like a really great human being, but still got stuck on that idea that like everyone knew what he knew about the company's financials, about the like client churn, about like, so employees at the very base level would ask for something and it's not possible. And we know it's not possible because of information that the top has, but there was no understanding in that conversation that the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, as much as I don't love that phrase, at the bottom of the hierarchy didn't have the information needed to understand why a decision was being made, because they don't look at the company's financials. They don't look at long-term goals. Their objectives as an employee doing Google ads for 6 clients are to do Google ads for 6 clients. It's not to make sure the business survives coronavirus.
Right.
So they come at it with what can appear to be a very selfish mindset. But if you put yourself in their shoes, like, why would they think about those other things?
Right. And they don't need to. They don't
know.
They're not there to care of those things unless that is the environment where you are transparent and they do have that information and you're sharing that, which I think is helpful at times to have that like transparency at the top.
One thing I will say about that word is if you say you're going to be a transparent boss or founder or CEO or manager, you have to do it. I avoid that word, not because I don't strive to be transparent, but I actually recommend, my friend started a business is hiring people and he had transparency in one of their values. And I was like, take it out. I was like, you can internally believe that that is your value, but the second you get to a point where you actually can't share things with people, they're going to see you as not being transparent and it's going to wreck your entire like culture in that moment. Unless you're willing to actually tell them everything to a degree, don't put it in your core values, because they look at those and they go, well, you're not doing it, so I don't have to do it. And then it becomes a distrustful, messy ball. That's my experience. Can you tell that my former bosses may have had that as a word that they like preached to everyone about being transparent about things?
That they talked about it, but didn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a big part of why the middle managers kind of got very frustrated together as a group at one point. They say they're going to tell us things. They have these big company-wide meetings where you can ask them anything and they will answer it. But it's like, it ended up being like a political rally where it's like the questions are just like talked around. And then no one is going to be like, you didn't answer the question, because no one's going to stand up in front of the entire company and call them out on it.
Yeah. I've had that experience. I know exactly what you're referring to. I know those types of things where it's, like or you just have an answer for it. That's like, well, we're discussing that and we'll get back to you.
We'll get back to you, but we never will.
Ever happen. And I've been there.
Yeah.
I've done that. We could talk for hours about
honesty is another one. I think like if you're going to tout honesty as a value, don't let your employees catch you lying about results to clients or sugarcoating things, or like, I think that's a big part of just being a functional manager, in my opinion, anyways, is like, do what you say you're going to do. And my husband would laugh if he heard me say that, because I'm very good at that at work, but at home, I am not so good at it because I'm like, I'll clean the bathroom. And then 2 weeks later, he's like, so bathroom cleaning. Still didn't. He's like, just don't say it if you're not going to do it, which is very fair, but it applies to the workplace as well. Just don't say it if you're not going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something that everyone struggles with, and saying, oh, I'll get that done today, and then you don't. And it's like, one of the things that I was just thinking through was, I I have like a similar, not the same story where I was like promoted to manager as an intern, but I feel like I grew in the agency business. I was at an agency for 16 years before I came to Cypress North, and I've been here a year and a half. And, but in all of that time, like I was kind of brought up on this, you say yes, right? Like that's how you get ahead, is like saying yes to everything, and being like, yeah, okay, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can handle that. I can handle one more thing. I can handle one more thing. And just kind of like expanding your capacity because you think that's how you're going to get ahead. Um and I feel like there's a very good reason to say no sometimes. And if you have that culture as a manager of like, you really need to tell me when you're saying no, but that kind of fine line of like agency hustle culture of like you can't just say no all the time and like not do your job, but like I need you to avoid burnout and say no. Like how do you handle things like that? And I feel like those are the things that come up in like one-on-ones, where you want to make this open environment and let people give you honest feedback and say no to things and create boundaries. But I don't know, how do you feel about that juxtaposition?
I personally, and I will say personally, because some people see a big value in hustle culture, and I don't want to diminish those people at all, because if that is how you want to do it, go for it. I'm just not coming. I'm not going to be there with you. I personally hate hustle culture, hate it. I don't think there's anything wrong with hustling or being ambitious or choosing it. I think the problem lies when agencies are built around hustle culture and don't tell their employees before they start, that they don't make it clear that that's what they're getting themselves into, because there are people who would choose to work in that environment and thrive in that environment. But it should be very transparent before you start a job that, the expectations are 8 to 8, 6 days a week. The expectations are, leaving your family and friends behind for big projects that come up. Like there are people who will still choose to work in that environment. I think it's really unfair when, the interview is all, oh, but we have beer on Fridays, which is a whole other topic. Alcohol in the workplace is a whole other topic I have big feelings about. But it's like, we have ping pong and we have beer on Fridays and we have unlimited vacation, but also you live here, change your desk. It's like, let's be honest.
Your vacation.
Also, yeah, we have quote unquote, air quotes, unlimited vacation that I'll never approve for you, but I just need you in the door. Those are the places I think that end up with really high turnover. One of the things at my last agency that I really kind of strove to make very clear to everyone was, if you want to work 8 hours and leave, then you can work 8 hours and leave. And I did it. And I think that's how a lot of people became comfortable doing it as well. There are obviously times called for me to work later or harder or longer. But the majority of the time I was in the door at 8, out the door at 4. And I refused to have my work email on my phone. I refuse. Like I was lucky with my boss in that way at the director level, where I was like, you can't talk to me on weekends. You can't talk to me at night. You can't talk to me on weekends. And you certainly cannot talk to me on vacation. Like something has to be genuinely on fire for you to talk to me. And so by me just being that way and being loud about it, because I could, because of the job I had. And then especially in the beginning, I was very necessary because the rest of the leadership team had just made an exit. So without me, it would have been more challenging. I'm not going to say it would be impossible, but it would have been more challenging. I was able to kind of just establish that as a thing right off the bat. Like there's a lot of balance at this workplace. So I think that's hard. But when you're saying like, with burnout and with employees telling me they're feeling burnt out, I've had those conversations, and I don't know if it's just because I was a safe person to have those conversations with. I think you have to really check yourself into how and why and when you're promoting your team members. And is it based on their work, or is it based on their desire to be there, 24/7? And often it comes back to a leadership thing. And so if you're a middle manager, it can be really hard to talk about burnout with your team, but then also avoid your own burnout, especially if leadership doesn't seem to care that people are burning out. So for me, I always tie it back. You have to know what your boss cares about the most. My boss cared about numbers, money, and client numbers. That's it. I mean, and his people, but like for the most part, if I wanted to convince him of something, it needed a number. And so whether that was like doing research on how burnout leads to employee turnover, and how, because of the environment that we've created, I didn't have an employee quit that I hired, which is a key part of that, until 2 days before I quit, which was really terrible for me because I had 100% retention rate until that moment. But I'm also good. I'm very happy for her. It was the right decision for her. I don't think
employees, I should have quit last week.
Yeah. I don't think employees quitting is necessarily a bad thing. But employees constantly quitting and like you're replacing people 6 months. So I kind of translated the numbers into, okay, if this is the amount of turnover we have, this is how many hours it takes to train someone new in our industry. This is how much money that costs us at the end of the day. Anything I could put in numbers for him, he was like, okay, let's do it. Let's keep this, or let's not do this. And I feel like I got off track from your initial question, so I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, what kinds of things, like you mentioned, like we have pizza and ping pong and like all of these things. And it's funny, I have a friend who says like having a ping pong table is not a definition of culture. Like that's like, that cannot be your culture, just having a ping pong table. You have to have a lot of actual things. But I think, a lot of people rely on those things to be like, our employees love it here. They get free pizza and we have a ping pong table and, whatever, all of these things. But I guess avoiding the burnout, you can't always avoid that with those things. You can't give them free pizza to do that. We've been talking a lot about here, like some feedback that we got in an employee survey that we talked about was that, during the last year when there was nowhere to go and people couldn't go anywhere and everything was shut down in New York State and all these things, like nobody took a lot of time off. And it made people really burnt out because they felt like, well, I'm at home all the time. I don't need to take time off because what am I going to do? Sit here in my house still, And so one thing we keep thinking about is like how to encourage people to take that time and make sure that they're taking it. But what are some other things? Do you have any other ideas or things that have helped your employees avoid burnout besides just like taking time off? But like, are there things that you do that make it fun or different that can help them manage that?
Well, I think
get to that point.
It's a really good thing that your employees are telling you things, first of all, because I just had a conversation with someone that was borderline infuriating for me, where they were like, my organization is perfect and it's fine. And like, everything is great. And I'm like, well, have you asked your employees what they want? Like, yeah, you think all these things are great, but you also have all the money, a nanny, like a stay-at-home chef. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, like you've earned them, but does like Brad in accounting have the money to have those things that make his life easier? Like what you think is great as the leader of your company is a very different perspective than what your employees actually need. And they responded and they were like, well, I did a survey and everything was fine. And to me, it's like, if you don't get at least one comment on a survey, especially an anonymous one, they're scared. They're scared of you.
And they don't believe you that it's anonymous.
Yes. Which is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
It's the problem with anonymous feedback is people don't believe it's anonymous. So and in that situation, I mean, they didn't listen to me and they're not going to. And I have heard stories from within that particular organization from people who are burnt out, do not feel taken care of. And so I also know that whether it's perception or reality, there is a perception of a problem in that situation. And in that situation, when they're not even talking to you, your middle managers won't give you the feedback, because middle managers are a wealth of information that are generally remain untapped. Then the only thing at that point, if you do want to make changes, external consultants, that's the only thing that you can do that shifts change in the right direction at that point, because they need a person to talk to who they understand is not going to tie names to any feedback. And then you'll actually get that, and exit interviews, if they're done properly, are the only way you're going to start to see how things are actually. But that wasn't your question. No. Anyways.
It's okay. But I agree with all of that. We did, and like throughout the pandemic, we started having monthly meetings where we would share the good and the bad and talk about like what was going on that was kind of scary and what was going on that was good, and, you know, what we're thinking about. And we continued that, even being back in the office, we've continued that like kind of regular conversation and communication about what's going on. And we've done several surveys that let people do that, but like kind of open that stream of communication where like you can say whatever you want and tell us in this anonymous format, or you can put your name to it. It's not like mandatory that they put their name. A lot of people do just tell us who it is, and they're like, I think this or that. And we've gotten really good feedback. And then we have gotten some of those constructive things like, oh, I wish, you know, I felt more encouraged to take time off. And it's like, no, we want you to take your time off. Let's do this. So I think I love that kind of feedback tool and getting survey responses and like making sure that people feel like they can improve it.
Even with the best managers and even with the best relationships, they're never going to tell you everything 100% of the time. I always tell my employees that I want to know if they're thinking about leaving. And as much as I'm confident I've had good relationships with all of them, like all of them, the ones that have quit without telling me before, because of course they're going to. But I do generally get a sense of when they're going to leave, because they'll tell me they're being recruited or that they're looking at other opportunities. Like, so I get a sense of like the beginning part of it typically. But when it comes to vacation, I mean, everything starts with demonstrating it yourself. So if your leadership and if your middle managers aren't using their vacation and using it properly, which is like actually taking a vacation, then your employees are certainly not going to do it themselves, right? It's like behavior modeling. So when I went on vacation, I went to Southeast Asia for 3 weeks just before the pandemic happened. You better believe I talked to literally nobody from work. I was like, you'll all be fine. And if you're not fine, I'll deal with it when I get back. And I left. Like, I fully disconnected. I checked in with my right-hand person once, 10 days into my vacation. And he messaged me back and was like, what are you doing? Get off your phone. Like, that was it. So that was the culture. It was like, when you're out of the office, you're out of the office. So I think that's a big part of it. I think to really just asking what they want. Some employees want the foosball table. They want the ping pong table. They want the camaraderie that provides. Those are usually, not to generalize, the single early 20s. My life revolves around my friendships from work and work. Those are usually those people. And that's totally fine. That's what I wanted when I was in my early 20s. And then you have the people who want, you know, help with their babysitting, or they want childcare benefits, or what's really important to them is being able to take care of their parents, and so it gets a little bit tougher as you get bigger and as you have more diverse personalities and as you have more people to manage in terms of, because you have limited resources in terms of what you can give your team. But not having burnout starts with the top, and then it really is about communicating with your employees and your team and what they want. And so many leaders, it just baffles me. It's like in marketing, when companies don't talk to their existing customers, you know, they don't do customer surveys. It's like, why are you not talking to your existing employees about, and yes, like beer pong is not a perk. It is not culture. Ping pong tables and foosball and Nerf wars, which was the one from like, they're not culture. They are fun elements, but as you grow, if you're not having the conversation about like, is this still enough? Is this still something that makes you happy? What do you need? And then the other part of it is the trauma piece. Like, a lot of people, your organization could be perfectly functional, but previously they've gotten in trouble for asking for what they need, or they haven't been heard or listened to. And so they're making the assumption that that's going to happen again. And that's a little bit of a harder one to overcome, and usually just comes with them witnessing that everything is going to be fine. Like witnessing you take your vacations, and then witnessing their managers, and then witnessing their colleagues, and then being like, okay, it is safe for me to ask for what I need here. But that takes a lot longer.
Definitely. And I think that's really important to remember. Everybody's different. They have different experiences, and you need to not think everyone's the same coming in, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess, is there anything that we haven't talked about that maybe you learned from someone that managed you, that you always try to emulate, or maybe even something that you're like, I will never be this manager to my people?
Gosh, there's more of the second
than
the first.
That's how we all learn, isn't it?
I think the first manager that I kind of, said hi to earlier a little bit, I did learn something really good from him, and I'll give credit where it's due. And that is just the self-awareness piece. I think we haven't talked about it here, but I think self-awareness is the most important trait to have as a manager. And I will die on that hill because it leads into every other kind of facet or element of being a manager. And while he wasn't completely self-aware because he couldn't take criticism, he was aware enough to surround himself with people who had the skills that he did not. I think that's been one of my strengths in building really functional teams. Mm-hmm. My right-hand person, who is now in the job that I had in August, I am extroverted. I am emotional. I am a bigger picture person. I'm a people person. I have a really high EQ. And so it's just, those are my things. That's what I am very good at. What I am not good at, which is what we always call areas of opportunity. I don't call them weaknesses because I think that makes them sound bad, but everyone has them. So they're areas of opportunity. Mm-hmm. My areas of opportunity are around sometimes the little details, sometimes the processes, being quiet. And so my right-hand person was those things. Also with a level of emotional intelligence, but just not maybe as high as like mine in terms of being a people person. But when it comes to details, when it came to processes, when it came to having conversations in a different way or approaching my quieter employees, and the two of us side by side, like we're puzzle pieces. So everything that I lacked as a manager, because nobody is perfect, he had. And what I did when I left is his now right-hand person is a version of me, very similar in personality. So now they're still balanced. And what that did too was when my quieter employees didn't want to have one-on-ones with me or didn't want to talk, he could check in with them. He was more aligned in terms of personality. And so I think the biggest thing I've learned from other managers is just balancing out the team that you have. And if you see a weakness, like a lot of places will hire cookie cutter versions of their best employees, but that actually ends up giving you a really big gap in terms of skill set. And the thing I would say not to do is just don't forget that your team doesn't have the information you have, and to remember that they don't owe you anything beyond the employment contract that they've signed. They have signed to work for you for X number of hours a week. Like literally the contract that they signed is all they owe you. They don't owe the organization anything. They don't owe you for their career, the beginning of their career. They don't owe you this like mountain of gratitude for the work that you choose to do.
Yeah.
And putting that on your employees is just so unfair. And I tried to remember that when, my team gets frustrated sometimes, it's like they don't have the information I do. And even though it's really lonely as a manager, and that's another reason I started the newsletter, is like it's very lonely and it can feel like they're not grateful, but that's like it's not their job to be grateful for you.
Yeah.
And that I think is a tough one.
And it's not a normal thing for them to tell you all the time how grateful they are for you. It's
right?
like kids, like my kids don't thank me for anything. Well, they do. They have good manners. I've taught them good manners, but like, like they're not like every day, like, wow, thank you so much for this or that. They like take you for granted because you're their mom. And I feel like then, I don't know, when I left my old job, a lot of people said some really nice things that like I didn't realize that I had an impact on, or like I forgot about, or, just different things that like, no matter how small, it was really nice to like hear that, they were grateful for that time, or they were grateful for this, that happened. And that like is helpful to know, and like write those things down for when you're feeling like, no one cares.
That is a great piece of advice, is like, keep those warm fuzzies. I actually have an email folder called warm fuzzies. So when my employees or my clients like do say the thing,
Yeah.
I save it so that in those moments when I don't feel like I am doing a good job, or I feel underappreciated, I can open it up. I actually just got a package in the mail on Friday from my old team because we didn't get to do anything goodbye wise during the pandemic. And so they put together a bunch of like messages and a photo, and they mailed it to my new house.
That's so nice.
A month after I left.
That's how you know you did a great job. That's awesome.
It is hard though, during, to like be working so hard for them or for something, and then just feel like they don't see it or care.
Yeah. Or you feel like you failed all the time because you
all
think you're
the
failing other
time.
people.
That's actually an upcoming theme in my newsletter.
Oh, good.
Sometimes you just can't do anything about those employees, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad manager. It just means that like it's not the right fit for them.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we just really want everything to work, and we put a lot of ourselves into our team members. So I asked for feedback when I left from my team. Like, what could I have done differently? What do you need differently from me? Because I'm always trying to learn. I'm not perfect. And I hope I haven't come across like I think I am, because I'm not. And one of them was like, because I've gone to teach. So I have 200 students that I'm teaching this term. And one of them was like, so you poured a lot of yourself into like 10 of us. And I'm a little worried that with 200, you're just going to basically die. Like, you're just going to like forget about yourself completely because you care so much about the people that are around you. And I was like, all right. I mean, I knew that about myself, but I will not get as invested in their lives.
That's good.
I will try to care a little bit less.
It's good feedback. Well, I know we've been going for a while here, and I feel like I could talk to you all day, but do you have any other parting words of wisdom, anything we didn't cover?
Don't be too hard on yourself. I think one of the things that you mentioned in the when we were writing like back and forth before this was just like looking back and cringing at some moments after like learning newer things now. And I think it's really natural to look back, and it's important to look back and like learn from things that we've done. But there's also a danger in looking back and like ruminating almost on things that you could have done differently. Like, the best thing to do is just take the lessons you've learned from those experiences and move forward. You're not going to handle everything perfectly. No one is. And knowing when to apologize or repair something is just as important as the actual incident. Actually, psychologically, it's more important, the repair. We remember repair more than we remember the incident in the beginning, just psychologically speaking. But nobody's going to be perfect. Apologize when you need to, and just keep learning, and take your vacation. That's my last.
Yes.
Take your vacation.
That is all super helpful advice. This was really great. I'm so glad that you came on the show. And where can our listeners find you and sign up for this amazing content?
Well, thank you for your kind words about it. It's actually fun. It's like my passion project. So you can find me if you want to just hang out with me at Amalia E. Fowler on Twitter. If you just want the management side of it and you don't want my marketing tweets / me angrily tweeting at brands, that's totally fine. And you can find the Wholehearted Manager at Wholeheart MNGR, or because Twitter doesn't let me have a longer handle. So if you type in Wholehearted Manager, you'll find it. And the link to the newsletter is there. I don't have an easy link to share because I'm using the free version of MailChimp. And so I don't have like a fancy landing page URL, but you can find it from my Twitter.
That's great. Well, we'll put the link in the show description so people can find it. So, well, thank you so much, Amalia. This is great. And
thanks for
hopefully
having me.
We can talk again soon.
Yes, I hope so. This has been super fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Awesome.
Good. Hey, thanks for listening to the Agency Scoop this month. I was so excited to talk to Amalia, and I hope that you all found our conversation helpful as you're managing people or as you're trying to even deal with your manager. Or if you have a friend that is a new manager or someone that could use some new tricks, tell them to subscribe to the Wholehearted Manager. If you like this episode, again, you can find us every month on the Agency Scoop. Hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss a thing, and leave us a rating or review. We'd really appreciate it. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Agency Scoop. If you liked what you heard, you can subscribe so you don't miss a show. You can also find us on the Cypress North YouTube channel or follow the Agency Scoop on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your ideas for future topics. See you next time on the Agency Scoop.